At exactly 2:26 in the morning, Lucas Bean was sitting alone inside the kind of apartment most people spend their entire lives dreaming about. 52 floors above the city, surrounded by glass walls overlooking thousands of glowing lights below. Everything about his life appeared successful from the outside. The expensive whiskey beside him remained untouched. A baseball game played silently across the massive television mounted against the wall, while rain slid slowly down the windows behind him. The apartment was quiet in the way wealthy places often are. Controlled, sterile, safe. Lucas built his entire life around that word after what happened 15 years earlier in Denver. Safe investments, safe relationships, safe conversations, safe distance from anyone who knew the version of him that existed before the money, before the luxury towers, before the carefully managed reputation that turned Lucas Bean into one of the most respected cybersecurity executives in the country. Because the truth about guilt is that some people bury it beneath alcohol, some bury it beneath lies, and others bury it beneath success, so overwhelming that nobody ever thinks to question what it cost them emotionally to get there. Then Lucas noticed the security notification. Front door opened. At first, he barely reacted because smart home systems malfunction constantly inside luxury buildings filled with electronic interference. Lucas understood technology better than most people alive. He built entire companies teaching corporations how to protect themselves from invisible threats. But something about the timing unsettled him immediately because he had not heard the elevator arrive outside his penthouse floor. No footsteps, no movement. Nothing. Lucas reached for the tablet controlling his apartment cameras and calmly checked the hallway feed, expecting to find empty footage proving the alert was another technical glitch. The hallway was completely empty, exactly as expected. No intruder, no movement, no sign anyone entered the apartment at all. Then another notification appeared. Bedroom motion detected. Lucas froze. Because Lucas Bean lived alone. For several long seconds, he simply stared at the screen while a pressure began building slowly inside his chest that he had not felt in years. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The kind that arrives when your body remembers something your mind spent years trying desperately to forget. Lucas muted the television completely and listened carefully to the silence surrounding the apartment. Nothing. Just distant thunder outside the skyscraper windows and the faint hum of air conditioning circulating through expensive empty rooms. Then suddenly the hallway security footage glitched violently across the screen before cutting black for less than 2 seconds. When the image returned, someone was standing motionless inside the underground parking garage, staring directly into the camera. Lucas immediately stood up so fast the whiskey glass tipped sideways across the table. The figure on the screen wore dark clothing with their face hidden beneath a hood, but somehow Lucas understood instantly this was not random intrusion or attempted robbery. Whoever entered his life tonight knew exactly who he was. More importantly, they knew something nobody else was supposed to know anymore. Lucas moved quickly toward the hidden safe concealed behind artwork in his office wall and entered the security code. With shaking fingers, he struggled controlling. Inside the safe were old financial records, encrypted drives, and one yellowed newspaper clipping from Denver dated 15 years earlier that Lucas never fully managed throwing away despite every instinct telling him he should have destroyed it long ago. Then his phone vibrated. Unknown number. One message. You really thought you got away with it? Lucas stopped breathing for a moment because suddenly the apartment no longer felt safe at all. Every shadow inside the room seemed different somehow. Every reflection across the glass windows behind him felt alive with possibility. He checked the front door himself this time. Locked. Deadbolts secure. No sign forced entry occurred anywhere inside the apartment. Yet instinctively Lucas understood someone had already crossed a line tonight that could never be undone. Another vibration interrupted his thoughts before he reached the hallway again. This time the message contained no words. Only a photograph. Lucas asleep inside his own bedroom, taken from somewhere near the doorway, less than 20 feet away from where he now stood reading it. In the corner of the image, resting carefully beside the bed, sat something Lucas recognized immediately despite not seeing it in over a decade. A faded Denver hotel keycard from 15 years earlier. Lucas nearly dropped the phone because the memory attached to that object hit him like physical impact emotionally. The hotel hallway. The argument. Blood against carpet. Someone gasping for air while Lucas made the single worst decision of his entire life. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because the story of Lucas Bean is not really about wealth, technology, or even crime itself. It is about something psychologically far more disturbing. It is about what happens when someone spends years convincing themselves they escaped consequences simply because nobody came looking for them immediately afterward. Most people believe guilt fades over time naturally if buried deeply enough beneath work, money, distraction, or success. But guilt does not disappear. It waits, quietly, patiently. And sometimes the most terrifying moment in a person's life is not when they commit the act they regret most emotionally. It is the moment they realize someone else remembers it too. Lucas walked slowly through the apartment, checking every room again despite already knowing he would find nothing physically wrong. Kitchen empty. Guest bedroom untouched. Office secure. Yet the deeper he searched, the more obvious another horrifying realization became emotionally. Whoever entered the apartment tonight did not come to steal anything. They came to remind Lucas Bean that the past was still alive somewhere waiting for him. Then the lights inside the hallway flickered once unexpectedly before stabilizing again. Lucas looked toward the security monitor mounted beside the kitchen and noticed something that made his stomach collapse instantly. The bedroom camera was now active. Someone had turned it on remotely. And across the bottom corner of the screen appeared one final notification. I know what happened in Denver. For the first time in 15 years, Lucas Bean finally understood something terrifying. He was never actually safe at all. At 52 years old, Lucas Bean had become the exact kind of man most people assume cannot be touched by ordinary problems anymore. Wealth changes the way society looks at people emotionally. Success creates the illusion of safety. And Lucas understood that illusion better than almost anyone because he spent the last decade building an empire around digital protection, corporate security, and invisible vulnerabilities hidden beneath modern technology. Publicly, he was admired everywhere. Conference speaker, cybersecurity expert, executive consultant trusted by Fortune 500 companies terrified of data breaches and corporate espionage. His face appeared regularly in business magazines beside headlines describing him as disciplined, intelligent, and impossible to outmaneuver professionally. But what nobody understood was that Lucas Bean's obsession with security had never actually been about technology. It was about fear. Specifically, fear connected to one night 15 years earlier in Denver that Lucas spent most of his adult life trying desperately not to think about for too long at once. Because some memories do not stay buried quietly no matter how much success someone builds around them afterward. They survive differently. Through guilt. Through silence. Through small moments late at night, when a person suddenly remembers the exact sound another human being made during the worst decision of their life. At first, even the audience would have likely dismissed Lucas's growing paranoia the same way everyone else around him did emotionally. After all, powerful people surrounded by wealth and pressure often begin unraveling psychologically under stress eventually. Lucas himself understood that reality intellectually. That was why he kept rationalizing the strange events happening around him during the early weeks before everything escalated completely out of control. Anonymous, encrypted messages arriving through supposedly secure communication channels. Elevator cameras inside his luxury building malfunctioning only during specific late-night hours. Strange glitches affecting security systems he personally designed. Once, Lucas reviewed building access logs after hearing movement outside his apartment at nearly 3 in the morning and discovered something deeply unsettling. Someone entered the penthouse floor repeatedly across multiple nights without triggering a single official access record anywhere in the system. That should have been impossible, which terrified Lucas more than he admitted publicly, because impossible things only happen for two reasons. Either someone is lying or someone understands your system better than you do. And Lucas Bean built his entire career believing nobody understood systems better than him. The deeper the incidents escalated, the more emotionally unstable Lucas quietly became beneath the controlled public image he fought maintaining every day. During interviews, he still sounded calm and analytical. During corporate meetings, he remained composed and focused. But privately, his life was beginning collapsing into obsession. He stopped sleeping properly because every sound inside the apartment felt loaded with meaning now. He checked security feeds constantly, reviewed encrypted logs obsessively, deleted old archived emails connected to Denver 15 years earlier, even though part of him understood doing so only proved one thing emotionally. He was afraid. And fear changes people long before panic ever becomes visible publicly. One afternoon, Lucas sat alone inside his office scrolling through old online newspaper archives connected to Denver while trying unsuccessfully to convince himself he was only imagining connections that did not truly exist. The article headlines still looked exactly the same after all these years. Local entrepreneur disappears after conference weekend. Investigation produces limited evidence. Witness accounts inconsistent. Case eventually goes cold. Lucas stared at the old photographs attached to the reports for so long that eventually the faces themselves began feeling almost unreal emotionally, like characters from someone else's memory rather than his own past. But then another encrypted message appeared across his laptop screen without warning. No amount of money erased what you did. Lucas immediately disconnected the computer from the network manually before checking every security layer inside the apartment again. Nothing appeared compromised externally. No breaches, no malware, no unauthorized access records, which only made the situation psychologically worse because whoever contacted him was either physically close enough to bypass conventional systems entirely, or someone from his past had been watching him far longer than he realized. As the days passed, additional unsettling details emerged around Lucas's life that gradually transformed fear into genuine paranoia. Security staff inside the building reported seeing a man sitting inside a parked sedan across the street repeatedly during late-night hours, though license plate searches produced nothing useful. Elevator cameras glitched at identical timestamps multiple nights in a row. Once Lucas returned home and discovered his office desk slightly rearranged despite no signs forced entry occurred anywhere inside the apartment. Another evening, he noticed a single Denver hotel matchbook sitting beside his kitchen sink where nothing had been earlier that morning. Lucas immediately threw it away without touching it longer than necessary, because emotionally the object itself felt contaminated somehow. Then came the photograph. That moment changed everything permanently. The image arrived anonymously just after 2 in the morning through an encrypted messaging platform Lucas himself once recommended publicly as nearly impossible to compromise. At first the photograph appeared harmless enough. Grainy, dimly lit. But once Lucas realized what he was looking at, the blood drained from his face instantly. It was a photograph of himself asleep inside his own bedroom, taken from somewhere near the doorway only feet away from the bed. Whoever captured the image had been physically inside the apartment, while Lucas slept completely unaware. Yet the truly horrifying detail was not the intrusion itself. It was what rested quietly in the corner of the image. A faded Denver hotel keycard from 15 years earlier positioned carefully beside the bed, like message left intentionally for him to notice. Lucas stared at the photograph for several minutes without moving because suddenly one terrifying question became impossible to avoid emotionally anymore. Whoever was targeting him did not merely know about Denver. They knew details police never released publicly. And deep down, Lucas Bean understood exactly what that meant. Someone else was there that night, too. To the outside world, Lucas Bean represented the modern version of success people are taught to admire. Intelligent, disciplined, controlled. The kind of man who walked into rooms and immediately made everyone else feel slightly less prepared than him. He spoke carefully, dressed precisely, and built an entire career around understanding vulnerabilities before anyone else noticed they existed. But people who knew Lucas personally understood something else about him, too. He never truly relaxed. Even during ordinary conversations, there was always a distance inside him emotionally that nobody could fully reach anymore. Friends described him as polite but guarded. Romantic relationships never lasted long after the divorce because Lucas struggled allowing people close enough to see the parts of himself he worked hardest hiding. His apartment reflected that same emotional isolation perfectly. Everything organized, everything secure, everything controlled down to the smallest detail because Lucas Bean spent 15 years believing safety could be engineered if someone became disciplined enough emotionally. But safety built from guilt never actually lasts. Long before the luxury penthouse and corporate success, Lucas was simply another ambitious young technology consultant trying desperately to escape financial failure before it consumed him completely. 15 years earlier, he looked very different emotionally. Hungrier, more impulsive, less careful. At that point in his life, Lucas still believed success would solve everything eventually if he worked hard enough and moved fast enough. He spent most of his late 20s chasing startup contracts, investor meetings, and risky opportunities across cities like Denver, Seattle, and San Francisco, hoping one breakthrough would permanently change his future. But beneath the confidence he projected publicly, Lucas was financially drowning quietly. Debt accumulated faster than contracts. Investors lost patience quickly. And somewhere deep down, Lucas carried a fear he never admitted aloud to anyone emotionally. The fear that maybe he simply was not going to become the person he promised himself he would someday be. That fear made him vulnerable to people like Lucas Grant. Lucas Grant entered his life during a technology conference in Denver and immediately became the kind of person impossible to ignore once he walked into a room. Charismatic, confident, reckless in ways that initially felt exciting instead of dangerous. While Lucas Bean analyzed risks carefully, Lucas Grant attacked opportunities aggressively, without hesitation. Investors loved him because he made impossible ideas sound inevitable. Women gravitated toward him naturally. Conversations became louder when he entered them. Even failures somehow transformed into entertaining stories whenever Lucas Grant explained them afterward. The partnership between the two men worked because each possessed qualities the other secretly envied emotionally. Lucas Bean admired Grant's fearlessness. Grant admired Bean's intelligence and discipline. Together, they convinced themselves they were building something far bigger than either could accomplish alone. And for a while, they actually were. The technology market during those years exploded with money, speculation, and desperate investors searching for the next breakthrough company capable of making everyone rich overnight. Lucas Bean and Lucas Grant moved quickly through that world because hesitation felt dangerous when opportunity appeared everywhere at once. Long nights inside hotel conference rooms turned into private investor meetings, hidden financial agreements, and increasingly risky decisions disguised as temporary compromises. At first, the lines between ambition and dishonesty seemed small enough emotionally to ignore. One altered projection here, one delayed disclosure there. Everyone around them bent rules constantly anyway. That was the culture surrounding rapid success during that era. Or at least that was what they told themselves repeatedly. But eventually, every compromise creates another one afterward. Lucas Bean understood that reality intellectually long before he accepted it emotionally. By the time everything collapsed in Denver 15 years earlier, Lucas already felt trapped inside a version of himself he barely recognized privately anymore. The pressure from investors intensified constantly, while financial discrepancies inside the company grew impossible to hide forever. Lucas Grant handled stress very differently than Bean did emotionally. Instead of slowing down, Grant doubled the risks repeatedly, believing bigger success would eventually erase previous mistakes automatically. Lucas Bean became increasingly uncomfortable with how reckless things were becoming, but fear kept him moving forward anyway. Fear of losing everything. Fear of public humiliation. Fear of becoming exactly the kind of failed man he spent years trying not to become. Then there was Megan Cole. Even after the divorce years later, Megan remained one of the only people capable of seeing through Lucas Bean's carefully controlled exterior emotionally. Their marriage ended quietly without public scandal because Lucas never allowed emotional explosions into his life if he could avoid them. But privately, the relationship deteriorated under the weight of secrets Megan sensed long before she understood them clearly. Lucas stopped sleeping normally years earlier, became obsessed with surveillance systems, digital security, and controlling every possible variable around him. Sometimes Megan woke during the night and found him sitting silently in darkness, staring across the city without explanation. Other times she caught him deleting old files or researching Denver news archives obsessively before immediately closing everything once he realized she entered the room. Megan never knew exactly what happened in Denver, but she knew something inside Lucas never returned from there emotionally. That was why one conversation between them stayed buried inside Lucas's memory long after the divorce finally ended. It happened during a rainstorm late one evening after another argument about his inability to trust anyone fully anymore. Megan stood beside the apartment windows watching reflections move across the glass, while Lucas adjusted security settings on his phone for nearly the third time that night. Then she looked at him quietly and said something Lucas dismissed immediately at the time because it sounded too emotional to matter seriously. You spend your whole life building walls, but you never ask what's trapped inside them. Lucas laughed softly and changed the subject. But years later, after the messages began arriving and the past finally returned for him, those words would become devastating emotionally because deep down, he realized Megan understood something terrifying long before he did himself. The walls were never keeping danger out. They were keeping guilt sealed inside. Then there was Detective Rachel Vaughn, retired officially, but emotionally unable to let the Denver case die completely despite 15 years passing since Lucas Grant vanished without explanation. Rachel spent decades investigating disappearances, fraud cases, and violent crimes across Colorado, yet something about the Denver incident never felt complete to her psychologically. Evidence vanished too conveniently. Witness timelines shifted strangely. Surveillance footage became corrupted during critical hours. Worst of all, Lucas Bean himself never behaved like an innocent person fully at peace emotionally afterward. Rachel noticed that immediately during early questioning years earlier. Lucas answered everything carefully. Too carefully. Not like someone lying openly, but like someone terrified saying the wrong thing might collapse an entire structure holding his life together psychologically. And now, 15 years later, someone else seemed determined to collapse it anyway. Because somewhere hidden beneath Lucas Bean's wealth, reputation, and carefully controlled public image existed one terrifying truth he spent years trying desperately not to face emotionally. The night Lucas Grant disappeared in Denver, something happened inside that hotel room neither man ever escaped from completely. Over the following weeks, Lucas Bean's life began unraveling in ways that no longer allowed him to pretend the situation could be explained through coincidence, stress, or technical malfunction anymore. The incidents surrounding him became too precise emotionally, too personal, and far too informed about pieces of his past nobody should have been able to access. At first, the disturbances still seemed subtle enough publicly that Lucas could hide the fear building beneath his controlled exterior. Security passwords changed overnight despite being stored offline. Apartment alarms activated randomly at exactly 3:11 a.m. across multiple nights. Unknown login attempts appeared inside encrypted systems Lucas personally designed years earlier and considered nearly impossible to penetrate externally. But what disturbed him most emotionally was not the technical sophistication itself. It was the intention behind it. Whoever targeted Lucas did not simply want access to his life. They wanted him emotionally destabilized. That realization became impossible to ignore after strangers started recognizing him publicly in increasingly unsettling ways. One afternoon, while ordering coffee before a meeting, a man Lucas never met before glanced toward him briefly and quietly said, "Denver changes people, doesn't it?" before walking away without explanation. Another evening inside an elevator, a woman looked directly at Lucas and asked whether he ever still thought about that hotel. Neither person appeared threatening afterward. They simply disappeared back into ordinary crowds before Lucas could react properly. That psychological uncertainty became almost unbearable because Lucas no longer knew whether the encounters were coordinated intimidation, coincidence, or evidence his own paranoia was finally distorting reality emotionally. Then came the files. Lucas kept everything connected to Denver stored inside a private encrypted drive completely isolated from internet access. No cloud backup, no shared devices, no network synchronization. He designed the storage system himself years earlier specifically because part of him always feared someone might eventually start asking the wrong questions about what happened that night. Old financial records, emails between investors, hotel receipts, archived news articles, security logs. Every detail Lucas convinced himself he kept only for protection, emotionally, while secretly knowing he could never fully let go of the past because guilt preserved memory more effectively than nostalgia ever could. One evening, Lucas opened the encrypted drive and immediately realized someone accessed it already. Folders appeared rearranged, files recently modified, and at the center of the screen sat one newly created document titled simply, "You remember." Lucas physically backed away from the desk because emotionally something inside him finally shifted from anxiety into genuine terror during that moment. Whoever was targeting him no longer existed outside the walls of his carefully controlled life. They were already inside it, deep inside it, which meant one horrifying possibility became impossible to avoid emotionally anymore. Someone extremely close to Lucas Bean either knew the truth about Denver or had been watching him for years, waiting patiently for the right moment to strike. The breaking point came during a cybersecurity conference in Seattle less than 2 weeks later. Publicly, the event represented another victory for Lucas professionally. Hundreds of executives, investors, and technology leaders gathered to hear him speak about digital threats, privacy systems, and the future of cyber defense. Ironically, Lucas spent most of the presentation discussing how modern attacks rarely begin through force anymore. The most effective intrusions happen psychologically first, through manipulation, through emotional destabilization, through convincing targets they are still safe, while their world quietly collapses around them unseen. Looking back later, many people described the moment everything changed as almost cinematic emotionally. Lucas stood confidently beneath stage lights delivering keynote slides to a packed ballroom, when suddenly the presentation screen behind him flickered once unexpectedly. At first, nobody reacted because technical glitches happen constantly during corporate events. But then every slide disappeared entirely. Silence spread slowly across the room, and a single sentence appeared in massive white letters against black background. "You left him there." Lucas stopped speaking immediately. The audience laughed nervously at first, believing perhaps the interruption was part of the presentation somehow. But Lucas's face changed instantly because deep down he recognized the meaning emotionally before anyone else in the room possibly could. His breathing became uneven, hands shaking visibly now. Another line appeared beneath the first. "Tell them what happened in Denver." By then, confusion spread openly through the ballroom, while event staff rushed toward the control booth, trying desperately to disconnect the presentation feed. Lucas stepped backward from the stage microphone as whispers erupted throughout the audience. Someone started recording on their phone. Another person shouted, asking whether the incident was staged marketing. But Lucas already understood something terrifying no one else did emotionally. This was not humiliation. It was escalation. His phone began vibrating violently inside his pocket almost nonstop. Unknown calls. Anonymous encrypted messages. Then finally a voice message arrived while Lucas stood frozen backstage, surrounded by frantic security personnel searching equipment rooms and questioning technicians. The voice on the recording sounded distorted electronically, but calm, almost intimate emotionally. Tell them what happened in Denver. Then the line disconnected. That sentence broke something inside Lucas publicly, because for the first time in 15 years, the secret he built his entire life around no longer belonged only to him. News of the conference incident spread online within hours. Videos of Lucas panicking on stage circulated across social media alongside conspiracy theories, speculation, and questions nobody around him could answer clearly. Public relations teams blamed hacking, corporate sabotage, extremist activists. But privately, Lucas knew the truth was far worse emotionally. Someone wanted him exposed specifically. Not ruined financially. Not robbed. Exposed. When Lucas finally returned home late that night, exhaustion and panic had already blurred together inside him emotionally to the point where the apartment itself no longer felt real somehow. The hallway lights appeared dimmer than usual. The silence heavier. He unlocked the penthouse door slowly while every instinct inside him warned something waited beyond it. And something did. The hidden safe inside his office stood open. Lucas stopped breathing immediately because there were only 3 people on Earth who ever knew the safe existed. Himself, Megan Cole years earlier during the marriage, and someone else Lucas had not thought about seriously in a very long time emotionally. Inside the office, a single newspaper clipping rested carefully on the desk beneath dim overhead light. Denver Post. 15 years earlier. The headline read, "Local entrepreneur vanishes without trace." Lucas stared at the article while memories he spent years suppressing forced themselves violently back into his mind again. The hotel room. Lucas Grant shouting. Glass breaking. Blood. Fear. Then the decision. The terrible, irreversible decision that defined everything afterward, whether Lucas admitted it publicly or not. But the truly horrifying realization came seconds later when Lucas checked the encrypted drive again. Files stored completely offline had been opened recently from inside the apartment itself. No remote breach. No outside network access. Meaning whoever orchestrated everything knew how to reach places no outsider ever should have accessed. And suddenly one terrifying possibility became impossible to escape emotionally. The person targeting Lucas Bean was not merely hacker, stalker, or stranger seeking revenge. They were someone already close enough to walk through the walls around his life unnoticed. Within less than 48 hours, the footage of Lucas Bean's public breakdown in Seattle spread across the internet faster than his legal team could contain it emotionally. Millions of people watched clips showing one of the country's most respected cybersecurity executives suddenly freezing on stage, while mysterious messages about Denver appeared behind him during a live conference presentation. At first, most viewers treated the incident like another corporate scandal unfolding in real time online. But as journalists began digging into the references connected to Denver 15 years earlier, the situation transformed into something much darker emotionally. News outlets resurfaced forgotten reports surrounding the disappearance of Lucas Grant. Old articles reappeared. Archived interviews returned. Suddenly, the internet became obsessed with a mystery most people had never even heard about before. And once public curiosity attaches itself to an unresolved disappearance, reality begins fracturing beneath speculation almost immediately. Some people believed Lucas Bean was victim of sophisticated corporate espionage orchestrated by competitors hoping to destroy his career publicly. Others became convinced the conference incident exposed evidence of a complete psychological collapse happening in real time emotionally. Online forums exploded with theories connecting Lucas to blackmail operations, hidden financial crimes, and possible murder cover-ups stretching back more than a decade. Amateur investigators dissected every frame of the presentation footage, obsessively searching for clues hidden beneath glitches and timestamps. Former colleagues began giving anonymous interviews describing Lucas as increasingly paranoid during recent months. Even worse emotionally, certain details from the Denver disappearance started resurfacing publicly that should never have existed online anymore at all. The deeper the internet investigated Lucas Bean, the more dangerous the story surrounding him became. And somewhere inside the chaos, truth itself started becoming impossible to separate from manipulation emotionally. One theory dominated discussions more than any other. Lucas Grant survived. At first, the idea sounded ridiculous because Grant had officially disappeared 15 years earlier without confirmed sightings afterward. But then anonymous posts began appearing online claiming Lucas Grant was secretly alive under assumed identity somewhere outside the country. Grainy photographs circulated across forums supposedly showing him in airports, casinos, hotels, and conference events over the years. None could ever be verified completely. Yet the uncertainty alone was enough psychologically to destabilize Lucas Bean even further because deep down, one horrifying thought kept returning no matter how hard he tried suppressing it emotionally. What if Lucas Grant never actually died that night? What if the man haunting him now had spent 15 years waiting patiently to return? At the same time, suspicion started shifting toward Megan Cole publicly too. Investigators online noticed she divorced Lucas quietly only a few years after the Denver incident originally occurred. Old social media photographs vanished suddenly. Journalists discovered Megan refused every interview request immediately after the Seattle breakdown went viral. That silence only intensified theories she knew far more than she admitted publicly about Lucas's past emotionally. Some believed she orchestrated the exposure herself after learning the truth years earlier. Others suspected she helped Lucas hide evidence originally and now feared becoming implicated too. Lucas himself no longer knew who to trust emotionally anymore. That uncertainty became psychologically devastating because every possible explanation surrounding the attacks felt believable enough to terrify him. Former investors from Denver still possessed financial motives to silence anyone connected to the old scandal. Corporate rivals benefited enormously from destroying Lucas publicly. Detective Rachel Vaughn remained strangely obsessed with the disappearance long after retirement. Raising suspicions, she manipulated events behind the scenes, trying to force confession psychologically. Even random strangers began appearing threatening emotionally once Lucas stopped trusting coincidence altogether. And paranoia changes perception faster than most people realize. Lucas stopped sleeping almost completely during those weeks afterward. Every elevator camera inside his building now felt invasive somehow. Every reflective surface triggered anxiety emotionally because he constantly expected someone standing behind him unnoticed. He began carrying handguns secretly despite never owning a weapon previously in his adult life. Alcohol consumption escalated rapidly too. Expensive whiskey bottles accumulated around the apartment, while Lucas spent entire nights reviewing old Denver records, obsessively searching for details he missed 15 years earlier. Sometimes he replayed archived surveillance clips repeatedly until sunrise, trying desperately to remember exactly what happened minute by minute that night emotionally. But memory distorted under guilt, and Lucas Bean no longer trusted his own mind completely anymore. One evening, he became trapped inside an elevator for less than 30 seconds due to routine mechanical delay. Yet by the time the doors reopened, Lucas emerged shaking uncontrollably because hidden speakers inside the elevator suddenly played distorted audio, whispering one sentence repeatedly during the malfunction. "You left him there." Building management later insisted no such audio existed in the system logs. That terrified Lucas more than the message itself emotionally. because now he genuinely could not determine whether someone was manipulating his environment externally, or whether guilt had finally begun consuming him internally. Then Detective Rachel Vaughn contacted him privately. Their meeting took place late at night inside nearly empty diner outside Denver, far from reporters and surveillance cameras Lucas increasingly feared emotionally. Rachel looked older than Lucas remembered, but emotionally sharper somehow. Retirement clearly never disconnected her from the case psychologically. She studied Lucas carefully across the booth for several silent moments before speaking, because immediately she recognized something had changed inside him completely since Seattle. Fear. Real fear. Not fear of prison or scandal. Fear of the truth itself. Rachel admitted something during that meeting she never disclosed publicly during the original investigation 15 years earlier. Lucas Grant's disappearance never fully made sense, even from the beginning emotionally. Evidence vanished too conveniently. Witness statements shifted unexpectedly after initial interviews. Hotel surveillance footage covering critical hours became corrupted under circumstances forensic analysts never explained satisfactorily. Most disturbing of all, several physical details inside the hotel room suggested someone altered the scene afterward deliberately before authorities arrived. Rachel leaned forward quietly while speaking next. "You know what bothered me most all these years?" she asked. Lucas said nothing. "Everybody behaved like something terrible happened in that room," Rachel continued softly. "But nobody behaved like they knew exactly what." That sentence stayed trapped inside Lucas's mind long after the meeting ended emotionally, because deep down he realized Detective Vaughn understood something psychologically devastating about the Denver incident. The truth surrounding that night remained incomplete even now. Then came the moment that changed the entire investigation permanently. Lucas discovered someone had been secretly recreating details from the Denver night with impossible precision. Same hotel room number, same timestamps, same hallway lighting, same music playing through hotel speakers during archived footage. Even the anonymous messages arriving now mirrored exact phrases spoken during arguments 15 years earlier that no public records ever documented. Lucas stood frozen inside his apartment reviewing the recreated material, because one horrifying realization became impossible to escape emotionally anymore. The person targeting him was not reconstructing the Denver incident through research alone. They were recreating memory, meaning whoever orchestrated the campaign against Lucas Bean may not have simply known about what happened that night. They may have witnessed everything personally. The truth about what happened 15 years earlier inside that Denver hotel room was far less clean, far less calculated, and far more human than the public theories surrounding Lucas Bean ever imagined emotionally. For years, people online speculated about murder conspiracies, organized cover-ups, and elaborate financial crimes stretching across multiple cities. But the reality began much smaller than that. Two ambitious men drowning under pressure. Investors demanding impossible returns. Financial discrepancies growing too dangerous to hide any longer. And beneath all of it, fear. The kind of fear capable of transforming ordinary people into versions of themselves they barely recognize afterward. 15 years earlier, Lucas Bean and Lucas Grant were deeply involved in illegal financial manipulations tied to desperate investors who expected success, no matter what corners needed cutting emotionally to achieve it. At first, the scheme looked temporary enough to rationalize. Money shifted quietly between accounts. Risk reports altered slightly. Investor projections exaggerated just enough to buy more time before the company stabilized. Lucas Bean convinced himself repeatedly they would eventually fix everything before anyone truly got hurt. That was always the justification emotionally. One more month. One more investor meeting. One more delay before correcting the damage quietly. But problems built on deception never stay manageable forever. Eventually, Lucas Grant reached a breaking point emotionally before Lucas Bean did. Grant still possessed recklessness, but underneath it existed something Lucas overlooked for years. Pride. Lucas Grant wanted success desperately, but he also wanted recognition publicly for building something real. As pressure intensified from investors and legal threats became increasingly unavoidable, Grant started panicking that the entire operation would collapse and leave him carrying consequences alone. Arguments between the two men became constant during those final weeks leading toward Denver. Late-night hotel meetings turned hostile emotionally. Trust disappeared. Every conversation felt loaded with accusation beneath the surface. Then came the night that destroyed both of their lives permanently. Inside a luxury Denver hotel suite after midnight, the confrontation between Lucas Bean and Lucas Grant escalated further than either expected emotionally. Grant had been drinking heavily. Lucas arrived exhausted, paranoid, and terrified. Investors were already preparing legal action privately. According to the fragments Lucas remembered afterward, the argument began over missing financial records before shifting toward blame. Grant accused Lucas of planning escape routes behind the scenes. Lucas accused Grant of recklessness, destroying everything they built together. Voices rose. Furniture overturned. Threats surfaced emotionally neither man could take back afterward. Then Lucas Grant said something that changed everything. He threatened to expose the entire operation publicly. Not eventually. Immediately. At first, Lucas Bean believed it was emotional manipulation designed to pressure him psychologically. But then Grant reached for his phone and began discussing names of investors, account numbers, and internal records aloud with terrifying seriousness. Lucas panicked completely during that moment, because deep down he understood exposure would not simply destroy careers emotionally. Prison sentences, financial collapse, public humiliation. Everything Lucas spent years sacrificing himself to build suddenly felt seconds away from disappearing forever. The physical struggle happened quickly afterward. Too quickly. Lucas grabbed Grant, attempting to stop him from leaving the room while still holding the phone. Grant shoved back violently. Both men stumbled near the glass table positioned beside the hotel window. Then suddenly Lucas Grant lost balance completely and fell backward. The sound his head made against the edge of the table haunted Lucas Bean for 15 years afterward emotionally. Sharp. Immediate. Final. Grant collapsed motionless across the carpet while blood spread slowly beneath his head. Lucas froze completely. At first he kept waiting for movement, for breathing, for some indication the fall looked worse than it truly was emotionally. But Grant remained still, eyes half open, blood visible against the floor beneath him. Lucas checked for pulse with shaking hands, but panic distorted everything psychologically. He could barely think clearly enough to process reality anymore. Then fear took control. Not grief, not compassion, fear. Lucas Bean looked around the destroyed hotel suite and realized only one thing emotionally during those horrifying minutes afterward. His life was over, and instead of calling police immediately, he ran. That decision became the true crime haunting him all these years afterward emotionally. Not the accident itself, not the argument, the choice. Lucas grabbed financial files, wiped surfaces instinctively, and fled the hotel believing Lucas Grant was already dead behind him. He spent the next several days waiting for police to arrive publicly at his door, waiting for headlines, waiting for arrest. But none came. Instead, news reports simply described Lucas Grant as missing after disappearing mysteriously during conference weekend in Denver. Lucas Bean convinced himself eventually that maybe the body was never found because Grant survived briefly before wandering away somehow. But deep down he never truly believed that emotionally. Until now. Because the shocking truth Detective Rachel Vaughn finally uncovered changed everything surrounding the case permanently. Lucas Grant survived the fall. Barely. Hours after Lucas Bean fled the hotel, a night employee named Daniel Mercer entered the suite while responding to maintenance complaint connected to noise disturbance earlier that evening. Daniel found Grant alive, but severely injured and disoriented emotionally. Instead of calling emergency services immediately, Daniel hesitated after recognizing names connected to the financial scandal already circulating privately around conference attendees. Curiosity became obsession quickly afterward. Daniel secretly recorded portions of the aftermath using old handheld camera equipment while trying to understand what truly happened inside the suite that night. By the time authorities became involved officially, crucial hours had already passed, and Lucas Grant's condition deteriorated permanently. Severe brain trauma, psychological instability, memory damage. His life never recovered afterward emotionally. Meanwhile, Daniel Mercer spent years watching something that slowly poisoned him psychologically. Lucas Bean transformed into wealthy, respected executive celebrated publicly, while Lucas Grant disappeared into psychiatric care, fragmented memory, and ruined identity. Daniel watched interviews praising Lucas's intelligence, magazine covers celebrating his success, television appearances presenting him as expert on trust, security, and control emotionally. Every achievement Lucas gained afterward became unbearable for Daniel because he knew the truth hidden beneath the carefully controlled public image. Lucas Bean abandoned someone still alive, and the blackmail campaign Daniel orchestrated 15 years later was never really about money. That was the part Lucas finally understood emotionally once Detective Vaughn laid everything out clearly. Daniel Mercer never wanted financial settlement, never wanted publicity, never even wanted Lucas imprisoned initially. He wanted Lucas forced to feel what abandonment actually costs emotionally when another human being pays the consequences instead of you. That realization destroyed Lucas Bean psychologically far more than exposure itself ever could have. Because suddenly the story he told himself for 15 years collapsed completely. He spent years convincing himself the tragedy in Denver came from one terrible accident emotionally beyond his control. But the truth was infinitely worse. Lucas Grant survived, and the worst thing Lucas Bean ever did was not the fall itself. It was choosing self-protection over helping someone who was still alive beside him begging for help he never gave. By the time Lucas Bean finally agreed to confess publicly, the story had already consumed the country emotionally. News networks interrupted programming for updates connected to the Denver disappearance. Online discussions exploded into millions of theories, accusations, and arguments about guilt, responsibility, and whether fear could ever excuse abandoning another human being during their worst moment. Former colleagues distanced themselves from Lucas immediately, while corporate sponsors quietly removed his appearances from websites and conference archives overnight. Investors denied knowing details connected to the original financial scheme. Everyone who once benefited from standing beside Lucas Bean suddenly became desperate to stand as far away from him as possible emotionally. And strangely, Lucas accepted all of it almost calmly by then. Because after 15 years of running psychologically, exposure no longer felt like the worst possible outcome anymore. The truth did. Lucas prepared for the live confession carefully. Lawyers advised against it. Public relations experts warned it would destroy every remaining piece of his reputation permanently. But Lucas no longer cared about preserving reputation emotionally, because finally understanding what happened to Lucas Grant shattered the illusion he built his entire adult life around. Wealth suddenly felt meaningless. Security systems felt pathetic. Every locked door inside the penthouse apartment now seemed ridiculous emotionally, because none of them protected him from the one thing that actually followed him everywhere: memory. The confession was scheduled for national broadcast late Thursday evening. News channels promoted it for hours beforehand as one of the most anticipated public admissions connected to unresolved criminal mystery in years. Lucas sat alone backstage inside a private television studio waiting for cameras to begin while reviewing handwritten notes he never actually intended reading directly. Outside the room, reporters gathered like storm clouds emotionally. Some expected confession to murder. Others believed Lucas would expose broader corruption involving investors and corporate fraud. But deep down, Lucas understood something nobody else fully did yet. The story was never truly about financial crime. It was about cowardice. Then Detective Rachel Vaughn arrived unexpectedly less than 20 minutes before airtime. The moment Lucas saw her expression, he knew instantly something else was wrong emotionally. Rachel closed the dressing room door quietly before sitting across from him without speaking immediately. For several seconds, neither person moved. Then Rachel finally slid a thin case file across the table toward Lucas with hands that looked far more unsettled than usual. "We found him," she said softly. Lucas stared at her without understanding. Rachel continued, "Lucas Grant is alive." The room became completely silent. For 15 years, Lucas imagined countless versions of what happened after he fled the Denver hotel emotionally. Arrest, death, cover-up, revenge. But somehow the possibility that Lucas Grant survived all those years somewhere alive, yet unreachable, felt more horrifying than every other scenario combined. Rachel explained authorities traced Daniel Mercer through medical payment records connected to long-term psychiatric facilities operating privately across multiple states. Lucas Grant spent years under assisted psychiatric care after suffering irreversible brain trauma during the fall inside the hotel suite. But that was not the worst part. The truly devastating truth came afterward. For years, Daniel Mercer manipulated Lucas Grant psychologically while caring for him privately during unstable periods emotionally. Daniel repeatedly fed Lucas distorted versions of the Denver incident until memory itself became contaminated by revenge. Lucas Grant no longer remembered the confrontation clearly anymore. He only remembered fear, pain, blood, and one belief repeated so many times it eventually became reality inside his damaged mind emotionally. Ethan Cole tried to kill him. Lucas Bean physically lowered his head into his hands after hearing that, because suddenly even the possibility of redemption disappeared emotionally. The one person he needed forgiveness from most no longer even understood what truly happened anymore. Daniel Mercer stole that too. Not through violence, but through years of manipulation, carefully reshaping memory around trauma until Lucas Grant's entire identity became trapped inside distorted grief and confusion. Rachel told Lucas something else before leaving the room. "Whatever happens tonight," she said quietly, "you need to see him first." The confession broadcast never happened publicly that evening. Instead, Lucas Bean traveled with Detective Rachel Vaughn several hours outside Denver toward a quiet psychiatric care facility hidden far from media attention and public visibility emotionally. The drive itself felt unreal somehow. Rain against windows, empty highways, silence stretching endlessly between conversation. Lucas spent most of the trip staring outside, unable to process what he was about to face, because deep down one terrifying question kept repeating emotionally. What if Lucas Grant remembered him? And perhaps even worse, what if he didn't? The facility itself looked ordinary. Clean hallways, quiet nurses, dim lighting designed to calm emotionally unstable patients. Nothing about the place resembled the dramatic ending Lucas imagined privately for years. No confrontation, no screaming, no revenge waiting behind locked doors. Just exhaustion, damage, and lives permanently broken by one terrible night nobody handled correctly emotionally. When the orderly finally guided Lucas into the room, he almost failed recognizing Lucas Grant immediately. The charismatic, fearless man from 15 years earlier was gone completely. Older now, fragile, movements slower, eyes distant in ways difficult to describe emotionally. Lucas Grant sat quietly beside windows staring at snowfall outside when Lucas Bean entered the room. For several seconds nothing happened. Then slowly Grant looked toward him with faint confusion crossing his face. Rachel remained outside deliberately, because this moment belonged only to the two men whose lives became trapped together emotionally inside that Denver hotel room long ago. Lucas Bean opened his mouth several times trying to speak. No words came. Finally, Lucas Grant tilted his head slightly while studying him carefully, as though searching damaged memories for something almost recognizable emotionally. Then softly, almost gently, he asked one question. Why didn't you help me? Lucas Bean could not answer. Because there was no explanation left any more powerful enough to justify the truth emotionally. Fear, cowardice, self-preservation. None sounded meaningful beside the damage created afterward. So Lucas simply stood there silently, while Lucas Grant looked back toward the falling snow outside the window again, as though the moment already drifted partially beyond his grasp emotionally. And somehow that silence became far more devastating than anger ever could have been. The story ends later that night with Lucas Bean returning alone to his dark apartment, overlooking the city skyline once again. Security cameras still monitor every room endlessly. Motion sensors glow faintly across walls. Digital locks engage automatically behind him. Everything remains exactly as secure as before emotionally. But Lucas finally understands something now. Safety built on buried guilt was never safety at all. The voiceover speaks one final time. Most people believe guilt comes from doing something terrible. But sometimes, it comes from the moment you choose yourself over another human being. Lucas Bean sits alone in silence while security monitors flicker endlessly around him. Watch from every angle, unable to escape the one memory no system can erase. Fade to black. As the story of Lucas Bean spread across the internet afterward, the reactions became deeply divided emotionally because people were no longer debating only crime, guilt, or punishment anymore. The conversation evolved into something far more personal. Thousands of viewers saw pieces of themselves inside Lucas's decisions, even if they never admitted it publicly. Not because most people would abandon someone inside hotel room after violent accident, but because almost everyone understands fear powerful enough to override morality for a single moment emotionally. And sometimes one moment becomes the event that defines an entire life afterward. Some viewers believed Lucas Bean deserved absolutely no sympathy at all. They argued the moment Lucas fled that hotel room, he made conscious decision to protect himself instead of another human being who still needed help. To them, everything that followed emotionally was consequence. The wealth, the paranoia, the collapse of his relationships, the endless obsession with security systems and control. None of it erased the reality that Lucas Grant might have recovered differently had emergency services arrived immediately that night. Many people watching the story insisted fear explains behavior emotionally, but it does not excuse it. Others saw the situation differently. Because the terrifying truth about panic is that ordinary people often imagine themselves acting heroically during catastrophic moments until real fear finally arrives emotionally. And when it does, instinct takes control faster than logic. Lucas Bean was not hardened criminal. He was frightened man watching his future collapse in front of him within seconds. That does not make his decision morally acceptable, but for many viewers it made the tragedy feel painfully human, which is exactly why the story stayed with people long after it ended emotionally. There were no monsters hiding in shadows. No elaborate conspiracies controlling everything from behind closed doors. Just damaged people making terrible decisions under pressure and then spending years trapped inside consequences they never imagined surviving psychologically. And perhaps the most devastating part of the entire story was realizing Lucas Bean's punishment began long before the public ever discovered the truth. Because guilt changes people quietly. It isolates them emotionally. It reshapes relationships. It creates distance between who someone truly is and who they pretend to become publicly afterward. That was why Lucas built walls around every aspect of his life emotionally after Denver. The penthouse apartment, the surveillance systems, the obsession with control. None of it was really about physical safety. It was about trying desperately to create an environment where chaos could never reach him again. But guilt does not disappear simply because someone avoids consequences publicly. Sometimes the punishment becomes internal long before society ever notices anything wrong. And that raises the final question this story leaves behind emotionally. Do you think Lucas Bean deserved redemption? Or did he wait too long to finally tell the truth? Because depending on your answer, the entire meaning of his story changes. Some people believe confession matters no matter how late it comes emotionally. Others believe certain moments cannot be repaired once fear causes irreversible damage to another life. And perhaps the hardest reality to accept is that both ideas may be true at the same time. We also want to hear from you personally. Would fear make you run too if your entire future suddenly seemed seconds away from destruction? Can guilt destroy someone emotionally even if nobody else ever learns the truth publicly? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, because stories like this reveal uncomfortable truths about human nature most people rarely discuss honestly. Everyone believes they know exactly what they would do during moments of crisis emotionally. But reality often exposes parts of human psychology far more complicated than morality feels in hindsight. And if you think Lucas Bean's secret destroyed lives, wait until you hear what happened after the next person thought they were safe.